Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. So welcome to another episode of Christian Apologetics, and I will be continuing on with this second video talking about a bit more about the postmodern philosophy and thinking, and trying to share with you guys some tips on how you can spot the inherent self-contradictory nature of this philosophy, of this postmodern thinking about reality. Now, once again, this is just a very quick summary. You have here some key theories about this position, this philosophical position. He says here, postmodernism is a theory that questions grand narratives and objective truth. Instead, it focuses on how truth emerges through contextual and subjective circumstances. And there are six key themes noted here: deconstructionism, questioning regimes of truth, social construction of reality, power as productive, dismantling fixed identities, and intertextuality. There are probably some other things which are not discussed here, but I think that this just summarizes the main points of this theory, of this thinking, right, of this philosophy. And now, as I said before, this seems very appealing because of the fact that in saying, well, everyone can be right, everyone has their own truth, truth is relative, is always contextual, is always based on our perceptions, our experiences. We just can't be completely objective because we're always filtering reality through our senses, through our mind, through our experiences, and therefore they're always subjected to bias. They can be objective, they're always subjective, and therefore they argue that because of this, because of our mind, our experiences can also be prone to error. We can be mistaken about reality. Our senses are not infallible. Therefore, we can't agree with certainty that we can know absolutely reality, how reality is. We just can say that, well, this is how I perceive reality, or this is what I know about reality. But being limited by my own senses and being limited by my experiences and by how human beings are. Right. And now this, as I said before, it seems very appealing, right? Wow, very nice, very equality, very everyone is right, very nice, right? It looks very nice, very wow, this is actually the case. And so whenever someone says that no, I think you're wrong, then you can say, well, you're intolerant, right? Because that's your truth, that's what you believe, but don't force your ideas on me. You see, we live in a very varied world where all our perceptions, our truths, our ways of living are equally valid, are equally good, are equally true. So don't say that. If you say that only one way of living or one way of thinking is true and the other ones must be wrong, you're intolerant, you're a bigot, you are close-minded, and so forth. Now, I just want to show you here that if you ask ChatGPT, describe why postmodern philosophy is inherently self-contradictory, it's going to actually create 6 points here, which are very similar to these 6 points, these 6 key themes in the postmodern philosophy. And it's going to actually show why this is the case. Now, again, this is something that I've already discussed in many of the videos. Every time that you face or you're arguing or you're talking with someone that says everything is relative, or our knowledge is limited, we can't know anything for sure, or there are no universal truths, or no, morality is also relative, it's dependent on culture, context, whatever, everything is subjective, you can always ask them if what they're saying is also subjective, it's also relative, it's also dependent on culture, it's also not an absolute truth. Because if there is, then you can simply dismiss it, right? It's just their opinion, it's just their perception about reality, but that doesn't mean that it's also mine. That doesn't mean that it reflects a universal or an absolute truth that therefore is valid and is true for every single human being. It's just valid for them. So I can just ignore it and say, well, what does what you think? I think instead that truth is absolute, that truth is not relative. And you can't in any way prove that I'm wrong because your basic claim is that truth is relative. So that means that there can be someone like me that exists that don't agree with the fact that truth is relative, and therefore that says that truth is absolute. Now, what is the issue? I hope you can see it. If someone says that truth is relative and another one says that truth is absolute, these are two contradictory statements. That means that they can't both be true in the same sense at the same time. Either one is true and the other is false, or both are false, but they can't both be true because they're inherently contradictory. And this is why the postmodern is going to eventually come to a paradox, to a self-contradictory, self-refuting position, because if their position is true, it's false. And if their position is false, it's false. So whatever, in whatever way their position is, it's going to ultimately be false. Because if it's true, then it's going to contradict itself. If it's false, then it's false. And I hope that with now the help of ChatGPT, we can see more of this explanation in action. And it says here, postmodern philosophy is often seen as self-contradictory because it challenges the idea of universal truths, while simultaneously making broad claims about the nature of knowledge, power, and reality. The main contradictions arise from its core principles. And here, again, it lists 6. It says here, rejection of meta-narratives. So this first, I think it's more like the 3 or like 5, right? One of the two. It says here, postmodernism rejects overarching meta-narratives or grand stories that explain reality, such as the Enlightenment ideas of reason, science, or historical progress. Yet, by rejecting meta-narratives, postmodernism itself becomes a kind of meta-narrative, a broad critique of other systems of knowledge that claims a universal truth about the limits of truth. So I hope you can already start spotting the issue. If someone is critiquing the meta-narrative, like in this sense, or is rejecting them, or is saying, oh no, all these things that we have about reality, these are all wrong, then they are putting themselves in such a spot where they have kind of knowledge or a kind of truth that allows them to see clearly that these meta-narratives are wrong, are false, and that their own position is true. But not only that is true relatively, but that is true absolutely, universally. This is something that is true for everybody. See the problem? Again, they are critiquing other systems of knowledge, but at the same time, by saying that knowledge is relative, or that we can't know for sure, but at the same time is claiming this universal truth, that truth is limited, that truth is relative. And again, it's self-contradictory. Second part, it says relativism versus absolutism. Postmodern thinkers often promote relativism. Again, I've done a video about it if you want to check it out. The idea that truth, meaning, and morality are culturally or individually constructed and not absolute. Not only that, but also that these things are subjectively experienced and perceived, and therefore because it's through human senses that we get to know about reality, or that get to see meaning, or reason about meaning, or reason about morality. Therefore, these things are inherently, according to them, are inherently subjective and biased because they always come through our perceptions. But look here, it says, however, the assertion that there are no absolute truths is itself an absolute statement, which seems to violate its own premise. And I don't know why it says which seems to violate, because it violates, it contradicts its premise. So if I say there are no absolute truths, this is in itself an absolute statement, an absolute truth claim about reality. But again, and you can see that it's contradicting what I said before. So it's like I say, I do not exist. My words, I do not exist, couldn't be true unless I exist and I'm pronouncing them. So that means that my statement can't be true because of the fact that it hinges on a justification, right? On something that needs to exist in order for that claim, needs to be true in order for that claim to even be possible. And that's why it says here that it violates. I don't think it seems to violate. I think it does violate the premise. Therefore, it contradicts itself. Third, skepticism of objectivity. Postmodernism tends to be deeply skeptical of objectivity, suggesting that all knowledge is influenced by power structures, ideology, or subjective bias. However, this claim itself is presented as an objective truth about how knowledge functions, leading to a paradox. Once again, not only a paradox, but to a contradiction. to an incoherence. It's an incoherent claim because it just refutes itself. If it's true, it's refuted by itself. And now it says critique of power. Postmodern philosophers like Michel Foucault analyze how power shapes knowledge and truth, arguing that what is accepted as truth is a product of social, political, and historical contexts. Yet, this critique of power often comes from a position of authority. And I wouldn't say here that often comes. This actually comes from. So you are saying something about how power works in society, right? But you're saying it as if you have this ability somehow to stay completely objective, to not have any subjective bias, to not be influenced by anything, and you are able to see clearly how reality works and how power is dependent, is a product of all these things, right? Therefore, you are putting on yourself an authority or a knowledge or a truth that no one else has. Once again, this is self-contradictory. It says you're claiming insight into how power operates, which implicitly assumes the critic can see through these power structures in ways others cannot. See here the issue? Again, other point, language and meaning. Many postmodernists, such as Jacques Derrida, argue that language is inherently unstable and meaning is always deferred, undermining the possibility of stable, clear communication. Something like saying, okay, language is always evolving, so we shouldn't be using, like, meaning is given by a certain society, by a certain culture, so words meanings by that culture, and therefore different cultures can give different meanings to the same words, but they can acquire different meanings. So language is like this fluid thing that is not fixed, but that is just never ending, like changing, right? Then it says, however, to express this view, postmodernists must use language and assume their own ideas can be understood, despite claiming that meaning is never fixed. So once again, if words is the meaning is always referred, it always depends on, then when you're saying this, right, you are giving a certain meaning though that you think is fixed. Therefore, the person that listens to you can understand very clearly what you mean. You're not assuming that the other person will interpret your words in whatever way they like, but that they will interpret them correctly. So once again, you can see here the inconsistency is that they are affirming something, but at the same time, they are assuming that the other person is not like reading or understanding what they're saying in that view, but that they have this absolute standard or absolute knowledge or absolute truth in which they can clearly understand them. Well, in this case, this was about language, but again, this is something about truth, about knowledge, about morality, about anything that we have seen so far. And then lastly, it says deconstructions, instability. Deconstruction, a key postmodern technique, and again, you can find it right here in the top, involves taking apart texts and ideas to show that they are internally inconsistent or that they harbor contradictions. This is exactly what we're doing now with postmodernism. And that it says, and that's what it says. Yet, the construction itself could be subject to the same scrutiny, as it relies on assumptions about the stability of meaning and interpretation, which, if taken to their logical end, undermine even the practice of deconstruction. And once again, I think think that ChatGPT here is very kind with these words, but I think not only undermines, but just completely destroys the practice of deconstruction, because it fails its own standard. It can't even meet its own standard, its own criteria of standard. So again, it's completely inconsistent, incoherent, and self-contradictory. Then as conclusion, it says here, in short, postmodernism often claims that knowledge, meaning, and truth are contingent, subjective, and power-laden constructs, but it paradoxically relies on the assumption that its own critiques can transcend these limitations. So the postmodern is saying, okay, I can critique all these things about reality, truth is relative, that knowledge is relative, that everything is subjective, dependent on culture, depending on context, but at the same time, I'm assuming that what I'm saying is not affected by that. That what I'm saying is universal, is absolute, and it's not contingent, and so forth. But again, this is clearly a self-contradictory statement. It's inconsistent, it's incoherent. This tension between relativism and the assertion of critical insights make postmodern philosophy inherently self-contradictory. And again, not only the tension, right, but it's just I think many times we as human beings, we don't realize that what we're saying, like we don't apply the same rules that we, for example, when we critique someone, right, or someone else thinking or someone else idea, we use very rigid principles to understand it or to critique it. But very, very often we don't use that same technique and that same tools to critique our own thinking, our own words, our own ideas. We just think a little bit about them. They sound good, they sound well, okay, and we don't even like realize that maybe we are holding up to a self-contradictory view, philosophy, worldview. And again, this is bad, right? This is bad because it seems good. It seems that it sounds nice, right? It sounds very equal, very good. No, everyone can have their own truth. Everyone can just believe whatever they want. We shouldn't impose nothing on others. We shouldn't be intolerant. We should always be accepting. Everyone is right. No one is wrong. But again, these things or these critiques about like those instead who have different worldviews, though, they lead though to a hypocritical position, because of the fact that you say to anyone, well, everyone can be right other than those who say that we are wrong, right? But that can't be. So if you say that truth is relative, then you can critique when someone says that truth is absolute, because in your statement the truth is relative contemplates the possibility of someone saying the truth is absolute. And again, I've tried to show you why this can be, because these are self-contradictory, these are opposing ideas. They can't both be true at the same time. So either one is right and the other is false, or both are false. But we have seen that in terms of postmodern thinking and relativism, this self-contradictory applies by itself. So if it's true, then it's false. If it's false, then it's false. So it's false either way. So it can't be true. That's the implication. And now what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you a little bit of exercise for you to do at home. These are two quotes. I don't know if they belong to these two people. So, maybe Gandhi didn't say this, or maybe Davila didn't say this, but I'm going to just take the argument and I'm going to leave you as a work for home, just something to think about. Take this argument, take this statement, and try to analyze why is self-contradictory, or if it's self-contradictory, and which were the questions, which are the things that you would point out if you were talking to this person, to highlight, as we are seeing right here, the limitations of such thinking and the problems that if we take the logical implications of this thinking, then they're self-refuting. Here the quote is, "Nobody in this world possesses absolute truth. This is God's attribute alone. Relative truth is all we know. Therefore, we can only follow the truth as we see it. Such pursuit of truth cannot lead anyone astray." Again, I'm going to emphasize again. Remember, when you see nobody in this world, or like absolute truth, or when it says relative truth, is all we know. These are very strong and charged words, right? All we know. We can only follow the truth as we see it. Right? Such a truth cannot lead anyone astray. So I hope you were able to see that these are very absolutist words. And again, as homework, I try to look at this statement and again try to find the problems and the inherent self-contradictory nature of this statement. And the second quote is, "Truths are not relative. What is relative are opinions about truth." This is much shorter. Again, I'm not gonna tell you why this statement, the problems of this statement. Again, I want you to think about it. And again, reason what we have just discussed, how you can revert the claim on itself and to see if it's actually consistent or if it's not consistent, if it's inconsistent or self-contradictory. And hopefully, again, this can allow you to reason. Remember, never point out your critical thinking abilities, and always be very, very be critiqued. I don't know how to say it, but critique yourself. Critique what you think. Is your worldview consistent? So whatever I'm saying, can it be sustained? Like, is my statement, is the logical implication what I'm saying consistent with all the assumptions and all the arguments that I present? So can this be true? Do I have a proper justification for my opinion or for my argument or for my statement? And again, I hope that this was helpful and this was something that allowed you to see why or the issues of this view that unfortunately it permeates so much our society nowadays, that's why there is so much confusion going on. Because if you hold up to a philosophy or a worldview that is inherently self-contradictory, inherently inconsistent, then how can you possibly be consistent about living your life, right? Or about living in society? You can't, because your values or your principles are by themselves inconsistent. They are grounded on an inconsistent base, an unstable base. So sooner or later, boom, they're gonna crumble. And that's why it's very, very important. Remember, not just to believe something, but to believe something because you have good reasons to believe that it's true, because you have good justification to believe it's true, because it's consistent with itself. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching. God bless you and see you. Bye bye.